Good morning and welcome to Artefact Live, where we look at the art and science of storytelling with me, Scott MacArthur. Now, we had a little bit of a niggle there. I don't know if anyone had trouble getting into the show, but the system went crunch and I had to reboot it. So hopefully, well, I can see some people are here. So hello, how are you doing? If it's your first time here, please put your name and your location into the chat. We'd love to know where people are tuning in from. So this week, we're going to look at something that I think is really important, and it has certainly helped me be much better at being a storyteller. It's given me a better perspective on life and the world, and that is travel. Now, it sits quite nicely with what we did last week when we had the wonderful Professor Robin Dunbar on, Professor of Psychology at Oxford University, Magdalen College. He talked about the importance of connection, and I'm going to really dive into that today, but through the lens of travel. Now, I'm on my own today, which is really quite nice, and I'm about to go off on some travels. So I'm actually going up to Scotland right after the show. My mum and dad are in St Andrews, which is on the east coast of Scotland. I'm going to go up there and stay with them for 3 or 4 days. And I've got a few little trips planned where I'm going to go and explore some things that I've never seen before. So I will get back to you on that, as I often and always say. The other thing, I've got a friend, unfortunately, who's terminally ill, and he called me yesterday and said, look, you need to come and see me. So I'm going to go see him on Friday. So Tom, if you're there, hiya, mate, how you doing? I love you. Let me just see if there's anybody asking any questions. Hello, Doug, how you doing? Hi, Chris, how you doing? Hi. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through one is a personal experience, then I've got 3 individuals that I want to introduce you to. Now, you may not have heard of any of them. I think there's one of them you may have heard of. The other 2 I doubt if you've heard of, but these are terrific travel storytellers. And I want to I'm not going to go into great detail. You don't worry, you're not going to get streams and streams of video, but I want to introduce you to them because I think they're extremely important. And then I'm going to tell you one of my own travel stories, which I think kind of sums up the value of travel, and certainly the value of travel to me. So when I was a wee boy, as I say, in Lanarkshire, in the central belt in Scotland, my whole world was Lanarkshire. Despite the fact I'd had my first birthday in Ireland, I'd had my 2nd and 3rd and 4th birthday in the Caribbean, I really didn't know anywhere well except for that very narrow band between Glasgow and Edinburgh. And I remember that brought with it certain things, because the notion of the other was quite significant in my childhood. You know, unfortunately, there was a lot of religious other as well, but the majority of that other was to do with other places. Mainly, I have to say, England, because England was this dark place that no one ever went, and going down south was something that one just didn't do. It was a scary place, a dark place. And that kind of sums it up, because I don't think enough of us think about travel in the sense of how it can change us as a human being. Now, I've got a little piece here that I wrote that I think summarizes it quite well. Traveling allows you to meet people of different cultures with diverse traditions and distinctive lifestyles. As you travel and discover these newly found worlds, take a moment to reflect not only on the differences that you observe in their lifestyle and behaviour, but on the things that unite us. Now, who wouldn't want to talk about the things that unite us? But again, from my own experience, I remember having travelled, and I will talk about my own personal travels later on, but having travelled and it's weird when you leave a place, you become much fonder of the place that you left. So like many Scots, I'm very, passionate about Scotland, and mainly Scottish art and history, and a little bit of the music, but mainly Scottish art and history. And I got a hold of a book a few years ago, and I don't have it handy, but it was a very old book written at the end of the 19th century. And I look, as you always do, you know what you're like when you're looking at books, you look for the familiar, at least I do. So I looked at, I was born in a place called Lanark. Now, Lanark is a nice market town on the edge, just above the Clyde Valley, which is beautiful was a beautiful fruit growing part of the world. It's now mainly garden centres and people having tea and scones. But we were very proud of it. And I mean, I lived in a little place just outside Lanark for most of my childhood, a place called Carluke. And we were always very proud of the fact that, William Wallace had been in Lanark. It was a, part of Scottish history. It'd been part of the sort of the Wallace rampage down to Derbyshire, etc. But I got this little book and I looked up Lanark. Oh, where is it? And this is what it said in this book. It said, a place of little consequence. And I remember thinking, shit, because I had this place in a real, in my head, we had the best beer, we had the best sausages, we had the best, football teams, everything was the best where I lived. And lo and behold, you discover as you get older and more experienced, but more importantly, you travel. Everybody thinks that. Indeed, Rush wrote a song about it saying, everyone thinks they've got better beer, the local beer. And it's only when you start to travel that you really start to realise that that's a load of poppycock. And there was then a book by, funny enough, a guy from Edinburgh who I'm going to be going to Edinburgh on Friday to see my friend Tom, James Boswell. And he wrote a book, and I need to read it. It's called The Journal of a Tour to the Scottish Hebrides. He did that with the famous diarist and Oxford Dictionary writer Samuel Johnson. Now that book does sit somewhat in the Scottish psyche, but I'd read bits of it in English, and I'd seen TV programs about it, but I'd never really got behind it. And what Boswell said, and in fact, I think that it's fair to say Boswell was one of the few people who really started to bring the idea of traveling into the consciousness of the working class family, because up to that point, the travel, or rather what they used to call it, the grand tour, was the domain of rich young men, mainly, not all men, but mostly men in the 18th century. It was something you were privileged to do because it got you to explore the world. So that, by way of an introduction, you grow up in a place. You think that place is important. Sorry, I'm just laughing at my friend Andy's comments about Lanark and Carluke, mostly harmless. Yeah, absolutely. Place of little consequence. And, I grew up in that environment. I had some, very tentative touches with other places, but not very much. And I was trying to remember what really got me to think about travel, because in terms of holidays, we never went abroad. We went to places like, Dumfriesshire. There's a place called Sanker where my auntie still lives. She's in her 80s now, but we went down there in camping holidays, and we went up to the north sometimes. We went up as far as Inverness a few times, and then we went to places like, what's the best example? Yeah, what they call the Nook of Fife, which is near where I'm going later this afternoon. But we never really travelled. I never had my first foreign trip until I was involved in a trip to Germany with the Church of Scotland. We went on we had a very progressive minister, and I know some of the guys watch from Carluke, who ran a group. Now, I wasn't religious, but it was a youth group, and it was a good youth group. And one of the things that John Birrell believed in was taking us to meet people who weren't like us. Now that, I think, is the start of actually starting to understand some of the importance of travel. So let me give you three examples of people that I think really, really bring all of this to life. Because if you read or heard what I said earlier about, travel allows you to meet people from different cultures with diverse traditions and distinctive lifestyles, I think I'd like to frame this as a different type of travel, because my artifact today is this. It is the globe. This is a very small thing, but it still takes us quite a long time to get round it. And I think one of the things, or one of the opportunities that are often missed when people travel, is that they will go on package tours. So they'll go off to Paris, they'll see, the Eiffel Tower, they'll go to the Louvre, they'll maybe go to one restaurant that the travel guide recommends, and then they'll come home. And that really travel. It's kind of watching television in real life. You know, it can be pleasurable. I'm not saying it's not pleasurable, but and people bag things. You know, they go around. I've seen them. You know, particularly I used to work a lot in Paris for about 3 or 4 years, and you saw the tourists running around ticking off Louvre. You know, the Glass Triangle. You know, the Metropolitan. You know, the Underground. The Le Périphérique. Whatever it was, they would tick them off. You know, Shakespeare's Cafe. Tick all this. They would go around, but they wouldn't actually really get into it and actually experience it in reality. So the 3 people I'm going to talk to you very briefly about, I think, are good at going underneath the surface. They are good at showing how they create that understanding of another culture. And of course, one of the key themes of this show is about creating empathy. And I think the 3 of these characters have all been able to create empathy, or at least understanding, and certainly compassion for the different parts of the world in which they have lived. Now, I'm not discounting things like, you know, Michael Palin and Billy Connolly and, I forgot her name, Joanna Lumley, all these people who are doing TV travel shows. These are great. And certainly in some respects, they get under the skin a little bit, but they don't set out to get dirty, if you like. They don't set out, that's a good Scottish word for the morning, dirty. Yeah, well, good Scottish accent anyway. But these 3 authors I'm going to talk to you about are superb at getting under the surface. So the first one, and this is the one I think you may have heard of, is this guy, Anthony Bourdain. Now, Anthony Bourdain did a number of TV shows over the years, mainly on the CNN channel, and I think he's absolutely extraordinary for someone who is fundamentally a chef. When you watch Parts Unknown, which was the name of one of his shows, he would travel around the world and he'd go to mainly cities, and he would actually get right down with the people in those cities, right down with the people, often making food, often talking about food, but he wouldn't go normally to the posh restaurants. He wouldn't go to the fancy places, whether it was in Rio de Janeiro or Edinburgh. You know, he would get under the skin to find out what the locals did, what the locals ate, what the locals drank. And to be honest, there wasn't really as much about food in it as you would think. I mean, some of these food travel and again, I like them, like the Hairy Bikers. I love it. I think they're fantastic, but they don't in any way, they focus very much on, oh, this is a local delicacy. They don't actually talk to the farmer or to the woman who makes the vinegar, or to the man who harvests the potatoes. Bourdain does. And I find him incredibly insightful. If you watch the document, because he unfortunately killed himself a couple of years ago, and there's been some documentaries made about him, and this book has just come out here. Actually, I'll show you it. This just came out last week, and the people are now trying to, you know, write about his life and why he was so important. Now, this book, so it just came out, it's called World Travel, and it is a guide. It is a, you know, I'll just open it anywhere here, Trinidad and Tobago, United States of America, surprise, surprise, you know, Bhutan, Canada, China, Cuba, France. You know, it is a book about travel, but what's lovely about it is that Bourdain takes you into the reality of those places. So I think there's going to be much more about him. And as I said, the documentaries that have been made, and there's some of them on YouTube, they talk about him, the crew talk about him. And, you know, I don't know how much they actually even liked him, because he was difficult. He was so interested in the people that he was meeting. He would then go off-piste. He wouldn't stick to the script. And if you're making a television program, that's really difficult. That's hard work for people to work with. And he was hard to work with, I suspect. But the man was a genius. So if you've never heard of Anthony Bourdain, I'll just put his picture up again just so you see him here. I think he's quite extraordinary. And in this quote, he says, you know, if there's one thing that I think people should do, it's to move as far as you can, as much as you can, across the ocean or simply across the river. The extent to which you can walk in someone else's shoes, and you've heard me talk about this before, or at least eat their food. It's a plus for everybody. Open your mind, get off the couch and move. And I think his insight, whether it was about politics, which he often talked about, music. There's a brilliant episode where he's in, I think it's Boston, where he was talking about the sort of the creation of punk and how it predated the British punk movement, and he got right underneath the skin of it. And he met some of the characters. He found some of the people who were never famous but had started movements. It's absolutely fantastic. So I really do recommend Anthony Bourdain to you if you've never, particularly if you've never. I'm so jealous if you've never heard of him before. I am so jealous, because it's something that if you don't, I mean, there's a quote here I quite like. It's not attributable, but it's the world is a book, and those who do not travel read only one page. That was me. That without a doubt. Before I started to travel, that was me. I only knew. Now, there's nothing wrong with being like that. I mean, if you look, one of my heroes that I have spoken many times about on this show is a Scottish writer called Nan Shepherd, and she basically spent her time in Cairngorm. You know, she didn't go out with Cairngorm. She just lived there nearly all her life. She wrote about it. She walked in it. She thought about it. She wrote poetry about it. And what she did was she was able to be in the moment and be very present, and therefore tell you a lot about what it was like to live in Cairngorm when she did back in the 60s and 70s. But I think there's another opportunity that you know, for us, we can get out and we can see the world and understand it more, because this thing is getting smaller. Because of social media, pace of change, the exponential growth of, you know, biology, technology, etc., and knowledge, I believe we need to get to know each other much better. And as you can see at the moment in the conflicts across the world, there are fewer than ever before, but nevertheless, you wouldn't always know it, would you? And what's happening with Palestine at the moment and with the state of Israel is awful. And I do think that it would be wonderful if they just spoke to each other a bit better. And I'll just remind you something that happened there, because it's kind of, unless you've experienced it, and I've never been in Israel or Palestine, so I've not got first-hand knowledge of it. But I remember watching a show about this whole idea of understanding, travel to understand. It's on YouTube, and if I remember, I'll put it in the show notes. But there was basically these two groups of people. There was the Palestinian group and there was the Israeli group, and they got them into a studio and they did basically did some DNA testing, and they found out astonishingly, because they went into the room and they found out very quickly that they really didn't like each other. I mean, there was real contempt between the two different groups. But then they did this DNA test and they found out that a lot of the people in the room were related to one another. They were related to one another, and two people were actually cousins, but they had no idea because of this enforced separation that they have in these two countries. And I think because they okay, it's not strictly speaking travel, it was just talking to each other, but I think travel can create that opportunity for people to speak. And that's an amazing story. It's they really could be spending more time talking to each other, and I'm not going to make a judgment on who's right or wrong on this occasion. So I'll just check the chat. I can see there's a few people here. Thanks very much for joining me. Hi, no questions there. That's fine. Now, the next guy. Now this guy is not that well known. He should be, but he's not. And his name is Redmond, and he's Redmond O'Hanlon. Redmond O'Hanlon. I can't even say his name. Now, Redmond, he's still alive, and I think he was born in the 40s, late 40s, and he's a funny old sort of thing. You know, he's quite traditional. He's a bit like the sort of mad professor that you might have met if you went to university. And this is a quote from The Guardian that said, O'Hanlon is celebrated most of all for his perilous jungle mountain treks and exhausting paddles through river swamps, for sucking out monkeys' eyes and dancing drugged for local tribes. Now, he's almost like an anthropologist. He when he travels, and a lot of his books, and the one I like is this one here. That doesn't fall down. Yeah, the one I like is this one, Congo Journey. Now he does write quite big books. I mean, he's one of these guys who does like detail, and he writes a lot of detail. But his way is to actually be immersive, you know, to actually go into the countries and actually become a part of that country. Now, that's almost, on the face of it, an academic pursuit that Redmond has, but it's not. It's actually really, really funny. And if you get a chance, there's a series on YouTube called O'Hanlon's Heroes. O'Hanlon, oh, I'm having trouble with his name. O'Hanlon's Heroes. Now, there's only, I think there was 8 or 9 episodes of it, and it was where he went and he looked at 19th century, it's 8 episodes, 19th century travelers, and he finds, people that did the grand tours just slightly later than what I said earlier, mainly in the 18th century rather than the 17th century. But he finds men and women who traveled and why they traveled and what they found and what they brought back. Now, still at that point, it was a point of privilege. I mean, people couldn't travel if they were like, from my background, living in a working class house in Lanarkshire in Scotland. But nevertheless, the characters he introduces you to on that documentary, I think, are quite, well, I don't think, they are inspiring. And the stories that they brought back were absolutely fascinating and actually started a transformation in how people in our own country and across the world wanted to experience travel for themselves. Now, building on that, and this is someone who I think she's incredible, Sarah Marquis. Now, she's a contemporary. She's born in 1974. She's Swiss. And she, again, is an immersive traveler. She wrote a book called Instincts, which I really like. There's another one called Wild by Nature, which is a terrifying book, because this is a young woman who goes around the world on her own, immersing herself in cultures. And there's a lovely quote here and a good picture of her. She says, I was camping in the Gobi Desert, and at 5 a.m. one morning, 5 wolves came howling around my tent. That's how immersive she becomes. She doesn't do any of the frills. She doesn't do any of the, the privilege that you may have if you go on your holiday to Torremolinos. She doesn't do that. She really gets into it. And a lot of the time, there's a lot of it in Africa and in the various countries in Africa that she's visited over the years, where she is facing people, mainly men, who really don't like her. She's attractive, she's blonde, she's she's independent, she's quite ballsy, she's strong, but she takes them on. Now, some people think that's pretty stupid, and there have been writers that have ended up dead because, and in fact, in O'Hanlon's book, there's a few of the characters do end up being killed because they tried to get it, into a culture so deep, but they made a mistake. And there was 2 women whose names escape me. I can't remember their names. Who ended up basically being eaten by cannibals. So that's not happened to Sarah, but she is a terrific writer, marvelous storyteller, and she doesn't take sides. She tries to step into the shoes. Remember what I said at the start? She tries to step into the shoes, to get into the different cultures, the traditions and lifestyles, and tries to understand them and then share them in her writing and on her documentaries. So Sarah is somebody that I would really strongly recommend. Sarah Marquis, somebody I would strongly recommend if you're interested in travel, that you think about, having a look at her material. There's quite a bit of it on YouTube, actually, so it's freely available. Her books are tremendous, though, and in fact, I'm going to be listening to one of her books after the show when I'm driving to St Andrews. It's a 5.5 hour drive, so I'm going to be listening to one of her books on the way north, because she is brilliant in terms of being a writer. So I hope you found that interesting in terms of free recommendations. Anthony Bourdain, Redmond O'Hanlon, and Sarah Marquis. These are people that I would strongly recommend if you're interested in really understanding travel and the importance of it, and how, as I said when I sent out the invite to this, I said travel writing and travel can act as an empathy engine. It's a classic example. Remember the quote that I know I'll use it all the time from the film Interstellar, when I talk about empathy rarely extends beyond our line of sight. Well, that, I think, the way to build empathy and build understanding in a reasonably straightforward way is to travel. Now, my mum, not well travelled, doesn't like travelling to the next town where she lives, never mind to go to different countries. But what she says, and I get this, she says, I love to travel, but I like to do it from the safety and the comfort of my own living room. I still think that's important. So I do think even the populist travel programs The Joanna Lumleys, Billy Connolly's, Michael Palins of this world are really important. But I think taking it, and I suspect if you're watching this show, you're interested in storytelling and getting really into the deeper side of it and understanding different cultures better, have a go at Bourdain, O'Hanlon and Marquis, because they can really give you some ideas. And if you're like me, you'll want to go there because you're like, yep, never been there, tick, 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 and off you will go. So that leads me to the final part of the show today. And it's one of my own stories. And it's quite a brief story, but it was nevertheless something that I had never really encountered. Well, I had never encountered it. I was very fortunate back in the 2008, 2011 to do what in effect was my own grand tour. I think I visited about 25 countries in the space of those 3 years. I was working on a job with one of the biggest insurance companies in the world called Swiss Re. And the company I was working for at the time, a company called Atos, had won some work to do basically a development program for some of the senior people in that organization. Now, to give you an idea, Swiss Re, based in Switzerland, there's a surprise, very wealthy. When you go into their offices, quite often you have to get a boat into their offices. It's not like normal place. It's not a normal place. But when you go into their offices, they'd have Van Goghs on the wall. They wouldn't have, motivational pictures. They would have classic, extremely valuable paintings on the wall. That was because of investment, etc. But nevertheless, it was that sort of place. So it was quite an interesting tour because we got to go. I think there was about 8 of us, and we basically every second Monday we would sit down, quite often virtually actually. We wouldn't do it always face to face, and we'd have a list, and the guy who was in charge of scheduling, John was his name, John would have the schedule and say, right, who wants to go to the Congo, South Africa, Australia, Canada, and we'd all go, oh God, I don't want to go back to there, I've been there. It got to that stage where we were almost, a lot of the guys were actually quite bored with the traveling, but I never got bored with it because I had this, I think it was because I'd grown up in that narrow belt in the centre of Scotland. I'd never really travelled. I thought it was the most fabulous experience, and I've got so many. And I'm sure if you're a friend of mine, you've heard a lot of these stories. But I used to love it, and I used to try my best to not go to the same place twice. I did go to Switzerland a few times, but nevertheless, and I worked in Paris for 3 years. But I tried to go a different place every time, and one of those places was Hong Kong. And when I went there, it wasn't that long. It was in 2009, I think, the first time I went to Hong Kong, maybe 2008, first time. I've been a few times since, but that was the first time I'd ever been. And it wasn't long after the United Kingdom and China had come to an agreement about the future of Hong Kong. That's not gone very well, has it? Well, I'd like to travel and find out. But nevertheless, that was the environment that we were moving into. Now, I think it was 5 days in Hong Kong, despite the fact I was only delivering these 2 days training, because I was going from Hong Kong to Sydney. And I know Andy's watching, and this is the first time I came to Sydney, Andy. That's how long ago it was. Anyway, I was working in this really rather fancy, lovely office block. All their offices were lovely, and I went in, and it was pretty, to be honest, it wasn't the most exciting thing I've ever done in my life in terms of the content. But I did notice there was one guy who didn't contribute. Now I'd make particularly in that environment, if you only get 20 people in front of you and you're up there telling stories, sharing ideas, encouraging them to think differently, you want everybody in the room to take part. And I thought, what's going on with this guy? Am I doing something wrong here? Have I missed something? Well, I then went up to him. Well, actually, one of the delegates who was basically my chaperone. It was called Derek. I know it wasn't his real name, but all the locals had English names. I think it was to help us poor, thick Europeans to at least have some way of connecting with them. And I went up to Derek and I said, Derek, who's that guy? The guy that's sitting in the corner there having a coffee. What is it? Is he not enjoying it? Is it my accent? What is it? And he said, oh, no. He said, he's the police. And I was like, what? And it turns out that the Communist Party, who at this point, the Chinese Communist Party, who at this point had, were gradually, almost osmotically moving in to Hong Kong. And as I said earlier, this is now, resulting in terrible tensions there. But they were moving in very, very slowly. And what they would do was, if there was any Western involvement in Hong Kong, so whether it was a conference or a company event, or like we were doing, a training event, they would put an officer in to listen to what was being said, just to make, well, my assumption was just to make sure that we were behaving ourselves, not saying anything contentious. So I wasn't that experienced at the time, and I got really nervous. I was like, oh shit, I don't want to say anything inappropriate. I'm a wee bit scared of this guy. I've watched James Bond, and it never ends well for the guy who makes the mistake. So I was nervous about it. But I think on the second day, I was so nervous I had to talk to him. And he hadn't said a word. Honestly, he had not said a word to any of the delegates or to me in the 24 hours beforehand. Now, on the second night, we're finishing the course. Then we were going to go up to have a meal in one of the restaurants on the top of the hill. You got up on the train to the top of the hill. And I said to him, it was an easy in. I said, "Oh, are you going to join us tonight?" And he looked, and I didn't know what to expect. And he turned around and he said, in quite a plummy British accent, "Oh, I'd be delighted to join you." And that was it. The ice was broken, and we started to talk to each other. Now, it turned out that he was there as a representative of the Chinese government. He was there to listen to what I had to say. However, he was there to check out the quality of what we were saying. And we ended up working in Beijing for the Chinese police. Which because he'd seen me speaking in Hong Kong. Now, I'm not, again, like I said earlier with the Israeli-Palestine thing, I'm not taking any judgments on that at the moment. It's not the type of discussion that we need to have at the moment on this vlog and podcast. But nevertheless, I had made assumptions about what he would be like. I had some sort of, I don't know, like Jackie Chan type thing going on in my head, that he was going to karate chop me and kill me if I said anything against the Chinese government or against communism. And of course, I think I did during the course of the events, because we were talking about sourcing and procurement and all these sort of technical disciplines that means that you have to act, globally to get the best deal. So anyway, he ended up, now I've lost touch with him now, but I was in touch with him for probably 3 or 4 years. And what he did was ask lots of questions. He was really curious, because in his culture, I don't think he had access. Well, I know he didn't have access to things like, our books, our internet, our technologies, etc. Well, he did have some of it, but it was limited. So he became not a close friend, but he did become a friend. So that was one of my favorite stories. You can see I'm smiling. It was one of my favorite experiences in all those travels. And believe me, I had a few. So I hope you found that interesting. I hope you enjoyed that. I enjoyed sharing these little stories with you and telling you about some of my favourite writers. And just remember who they were. They were Anthony Bourdain, who was the rebel chef. He was the guy who goes around the world. He's done over 200 programmes where he was investigating the cultures, the real cultures of cities, of countries, of peoples all over the world. There's very few countries he didn't visit. Absolutely recommend it to you if you've never heard of him. The second guy was a guy called Redmond O'Hanlon, and he is an incredibly immersive writer, an incredibly immersive storyteller, who, as I said earlier, wasn't like the dry academic, the anthropologist. He is still extremely funny. He said recently, I've forgotten how to write, and he hasn't written for some time, but he is doing more TV. So hopefully, he's in his 70s now. So he's very wise, and I recommend Redmond to you very much so. And then finally, Sarah Marquis, who is this, she's an adventurer. She's not just a traveler. She takes risks. I do worry about her more than Anthony or Redmond. I don't think they ever really Redmond did a little bit, but she goes places that I am not sure that I would want people to go in unless they were very, very well supported. And she doesn't. She goes in on her own with her big smile and lots of questions, but she's bold. So a real character, and I do recommend Sarah to everybody. So, as I said, I hope you've enjoyed that. Next week, I'm hoping that we'll have one of my new celebrity guests on. It's getting quite ridiculous. I've just, those of you who were following me on Facebook, I've got another one, Bill McFarlane, who certainly the Scottish people who watch will know Bill. He used to be the football, sort of the key man on football coverage in Scotland. He still is with the golf quite a lot. He was the World's Strongest Man commentator. He's a terrific journalist and now works quite a lot in the communications space. So I'm going to be talking to him in a couple of weeks about storytelling and the media. I did hint at this in the Empathy Engine Facebook group. And if you're new today, the Empathy Engine Facebook group, which I'll put on the screen here just so you can see, it is very, very straightforward. There it is there. Basically, this is a small Facebook group. It's not a marketing site. It's about sharing ideas, about stories. It's about, I do a lot of behind the scenes stuff in there. How do I do a keynote? How do I write a keynote? How do I select my stories? How do I make my stories interesting? So if you're interested in storytelling at all and you want a little bit more, please go into Facebook, type in the search bar, the Empathy Engine, and you'll find the Facebook group. I'm quite pleased with the people we've got, the number of people we've got in there. We've only got 50 odd, but these are all people who are really keen on storytelling, whether that is the corporate world or writing or journalism. The people are in there. So I'd really be delighted if you'd like to come and join us. Now, the final thing, and I announced this last week, and because of my something personal that's going on at the moment, I've not been able to progress it quite as much as I'd hoped. Now, if I got it, yeah, I have. One of the things, it's pretty blinking obvious, this, and I feel slightly stupid about it. I was talking to my colleague and pal, Tom Stanhope, who's a filmmaker who I've done a couple of shows with. So I don't know if you remember Tom, but we spoke about science fiction and we talk about film on the show. And he said to me, "Why don't you do a podcast?" And I said, "Well, I've got a vlog." He said, "Yeah, but get a podcast as well. Why don't you do a podcast?" Because a lot of people like to listen to things, not just watch them, not watch them. So I have organized already ARTEFACTLive, the art and science of storytelling podcast. I haven't populated it yet. I did plan on populating it this weekend, but say I had some difficult news I had to deal with and try and help a friend out, so I didn't have the time to do it. But that's coming soon. Now, I'm going to go up to Scotland this week, so and I'm in believe it or not, I'm in a caravan, so there won't be a lot of opportunity for me to do it, but I'm hoping that I can at least get one episode out of the podcast. And what that will be is it will draw from this show. It will take the episodes piece by piece. I won't do a lot of editing, but I'll do a little bit of editing on each one, and it means that you can go back and revisit, probably from episode 2 onwards. We're on episode 35, so there'll be an opportunity for you to go back and listen to the content, hear my guests again. And I mean, some of these guests have been extraordinary, so it's really quite an exciting thing to be doing. I can't believe I didn't do it before. I didn't even think about doing it before. Anyway, so I hope you go into whatever you get your podcast and subscribe to that podcast. It's coming soon, and I will try and do the trailer in the next couple of days so we can start getting content on there shortly. So thank you very much for joining in. As always, I'd like to remind you that these stories that we're gathering, these attempts to be an archaeologist of your own life, these books that we read are really, really important because they help us see and understand the world through the eyes of others. And these stories can act as an empathy engine. These stories can extend your line of sight and extend how your empathy is across the world. And remember, as I said earlier, it's quite a small wee place now. Small wee, what do they call that? Can't remember, there's a word for that. It's saying the same thing twice. But anyway, it's quite a small world now. But nevertheless, it does feel like we still have a long way to go to really understand one another. And also be on the lookout for stories, because those stories that you experienced this week, and I hope you have a story-filled week this week, because those stories could change the world. I hope you found that interesting. Thanks ever so much for tuning in. It's been great. And I hope to see you next Tuesday. And I hope that one of my celebrity guests is going to be on next week. And I think they are. But I'm not going to say anything because it's been really complicated organising diaries. So thanks for tuning in. My name is Scott MacArthur. Thanks for tuning in to ARTEFACTLive, the art and science of storytelling. Good afternoon.